Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for the Fairfax Regional Coach Call. If you have never watched one of our videos before, my name is Emily Owens, and I am the Vaso State Director. Tonight, we are going to talk through a number of things to get our teams ready for tournament day. So we're going to talk about it sort of in two different chunks. First, preparations for tournament day that you are likely doing as a coach, and then what actual tournament day looks like. So, especially if you are a new coach or new to Science Olympiad, our hope is that we'll get you ready so that you know exactly what to expect throughout tournament day. So first, thank you so much for providing all your event supervisor submissions. The selected event supervisors were notified early on in January. They should have gotten that confirmation. Um, they probably have not received any other emails just yet, other than emails reaching out if they're build event supervisors, because we usually have our event group leaders reach out to them at the beginning of the week before the regional. I'll also have like a lunch order for them. But just like if any of them are asking, please let them know that they should be looking for an email from our event group leaders. Um, and then if you need a reminder of what events they're covering, you as the coach can see that in the portal. It says what event supervisors we chose and what events they're covering for us. So again, the build event supervisors should have been contacted by Karen Emmons for training. And then other events, we had already shared training videos, which coaches can watch too, even if you're not going to be an event supervisor. If you want to know what an event supervisor does, or from, like that perspective, what's going to happen with the students in the room, we have a general event supervisor training, and then we also have a chemistry event supervisor like addendum. And both of those are available on the resources part of our website. So again, thank you so much for providing really quality event supervisors to run this stuff for us. We really appreciate it. Also, thank you guys very much for providing day of volunteers, those shift volunteers that have been signing up. We're pretty close to having all the slots filled for the Fairfax Regional, which is awesome. So if your team has not yet fulfilled their requirement, just know that you could still send parents, mentors, community members. If you want to, as a coach, you can sign up through the Vaso volunteer portal. Just make sure that they're signing up for the actual Fairfax Regional, and then they select their shift that we then approve for them. So if you haven't yet fulfilled the volunteers, that's the barrier that's keeping you from being able to sign up for build event slots. And so a lot of those deadlines and reminders are compiled in that coach checklist that I had shared with you all. So here's what it looks like. Again, we're going to be talking through most of this tonight just to make sure everyone understands what each of those components means. But that volunteer sign up for shift work is open until midweek next week. But the sooner you do it, the sooner you can sign up for your build events if you haven't already. All right, one of those other big items that is on that coach checklist, probably the one that is most pressing, is the student permission form. So all students have to have that permission form that's filled out on our website. In addition to any other permission forms that your school requires them to have to like travel, even within the county to compete at the tournament. But for VASO, this student permission form um, on our end allows them to compete. And then it also puts their name as an option that you can then add as a coach onto your roster. So you should be able in your coach view to see the list of students that have completed their permission forms. If they've done it, they show up. If they haven't, then they don't. And if they're there, then you can assign them to a team. If a student doesn't have their permission form completed, they can't compete. That is a firm rule. So please make sure that your students are getting that filled out by their parents in advance. So the rosters will lock for you all on February 14th at 5 p.m. So that's Friday this week. So please make sure that you're connecting with your students to get those permission forms done, and also then going in and making your rosters. Even if you only have one team, you do still need to like put them onto a roster. And so what that looks like is in the create your teams view, you have like your regional teams up at the top, and then at the bottom there's assign students to teams. So for any student, initially in the column that says regional team, it's blank. You click in the blank box, and then it will provide this like edit regional team drop down menu that then you can select the regional team to put them on. So again, even if you only have one team, it will show up in that menu that for you to select that single team. If you have multiple teams, then please just make sure you're adding them to the correct one. You'll note that it does keep count for you of how many students on a team, and if you're a Division C coach, also the number of seniors on the team. You can still also edit your team names. I had originally put on the checklist to have it done by January 24th, but actually it doesn't close until the rosters close. It's just like it's convenient to have it earlier because I was updating spreadsheets. But you can still edit it. So the defaults I believe are like alpha, beta, gamma. But teams like to be creative and have fun with it. Or if you have like school colors that you default to, but please feel free to change those team names. So you just click on the team name. So if it says alpha, you can just click on alpha and then type in whatever team name you would like. There's also a new thing you might have noticed if you've been in the coach portal recently that it now prompts you as a coach to let us know if you're coming to the regional tournament. So the reason why we do this is because we want to make sure we have at least one like school sponsored adult who will be there at the tournament and to know who to make coach wristbands for. So if you are attending as the coach, please make sure that you're indicating yes. If you have assistant coaches that don't yet have portal accounts, and by assistant coach, I don't mean like event mentors, I mean like second in command to you as the head coach. Please encourage them to make their own portal account, and then once I approve it, they can also log in and indicate yes, and then they can get a coach wristband. So normally we're looking at like 2 to 3 coaches max per school. So again, not event mentors, not like homeroom parents, just like the couple adults that are in charge of the school's teams, because they will have the ability to help with rosters and also the ability to file appeals. And the wristband is important because that's essentially the ticket to like be able to initiate and engage in conversation with VASO personnel at the tournament. If you don't have a coach wristband on, we ask you to then find the coach and relay your message through them to us. So you don't add the coaches directly. They have to make their own portal accounts. So each coach has to have their own account. So they can go in like through the same link that you guys go to on the coach portal, but instead of logging in, there's a button that they can sign up. So they make their account, we approve it, and then they have the ability to say, yes, they're going to be at the regional. Okay. So coaches, yeah, please do that we don't create coach accounts. So the coaches have to initiate that. If the assistant coach is acting as an ES, does he still need a wristband? He doesn't need it, but I mean, he can have it if he wants to. I mean, I know in that particular instance, since Deanna's asking that Peter's going to be ESing all day, so might not really need it since he's probably not going to be going to talk to Vaso on Flint Hill's behalf. But I mean, he's allowed to. It's just up to you guys if you want him to make the account and have it. Okay. All right, so I had previously mentioned the build event sign up. So that is open now. And if you had fulfilled your volunteer requirement, hopefully you've already signed up for your build events, or if you didn't, you can do so if you have fulfilled the volunteer quota. If you haven't fulfilled the volunteer quota, that again is what's keeping you from being able to sign up for your builds. If you don't sign up, your teams can't compete in build testing. And for this tournament, the Fairfax tournament is very large, so we don't expect that necessarily like event supervisors will be able to squeeze people in on tournament day without knowing in advance who to expect. So please make sure you're getting those volunteers done so that you can sign up and grab a slot for your teams. The sign up closes the day before competition at 7:30 a.m. So that's just to give our supervisors time to prepare, like I said, so that they know what to expect in a given session. If they have 5 teams in a session, then that, they go into that knowing exactly like how quick they have to be, how prompt. They're kind of like figuring out the schedule of their day. Okay. When you're signing up for build events, please make sure that you're paying attention to student conflicts with other events. We do not move other events. So take a look at who your builders are, make sure that you're scheduling them for a time where they're actually available because we won't move the written tests. You can schedule device testing also through the coach portal. There's a button that says that directly on like your coach portal homepage. And for each of your teams, you will go in and select a time to uh, test the device. So if you have multiple teams, please make sure you're doing it for each of them. There are only 3 events in each division that require sign up. So that's helicopter in both divisions, tower in both divisions, and then the vehicle event. So either scrambler or electric vehicle. Just note that wind power, last year, if you competed with us, we had it separated out and you had to schedule your wind power device test. This year, you do not need to do that. We will do it during the same block as the written test, which is actually how Nationals does it. Um, so there is no sign up for wind power. They don't need to worry about that. And then the optics laser shoot, that's obviously during the written test. So just those 3 events require self-scheduling. All others are set based on your team number in the schedule for the day. Please share your event schedule with team members and families, especially once you've set like the slots for when your build events are going to happen, so that families can know like when they might be able to like view the build events, but also notably like when you expect them to arrive. And we are going to talk through the flow of tournament day, but just make sure that they're aware of like what the exact time commitments are for their given events. And especially the events that are impound, which are only the vehicle events, making sure that they are aware that those devices have to arrive on time or there are significant penalties. But we will talk about impound at greater length. Something else that you will likely want to do for tournament day, making sure that your students have all necessary materials for their events, including their chemistry event kits, safety equipment, cheat sheets, their actual devices. And depending on the level that you're coaching, if you're coaching Division B, maybe that's you helping them like curate their event kits, get their personal protective equipment, develop their cheat sheets, etc. If you're Division C, maybe it's just giving them the reminders that they need to have those things. You decide what is appropriate for your team, but please make sure that students know that should be reviewing the rules and the VASO clarifications that we post to double check what they're allowed to have and how they're going to be judged. So we'll talk more about all of that in the context of tournament day, but these are just good reminders to plant in your students' minds before tournament day that they should be looking back at all of this and making sure they have everything that they need and they know what to expect. Um, Especially with traveling teams, please make sure that your families know how to contact you. I think everyone's pretty local for this tournament, but obviously it's important that they just know how to reach you if they're not going to be there on site. Parents and family members are welcome at the tournament. There's just not a whole lot they're going to be able to view since there are only 3 open viewing events in each division, and all others are closed door events. We will have the information for room numbers shared in advance. I expect to be able to populate that in the spreadsheet early next week, like in the tournament schedule, once Fairfax confirms for me where everything is. But the traditional places where they have their build events are where I expect them to have their builds again this year. If you've ever been at the Fairfax tournament, they usually have tower right in the very like opening of their building, like before their auditorium in what's called the pit. So that's kind of fun. That's like a nice congregating space for people to watch tower. The vehicle events will be in some hallways in the school that we'll have directions for since they don't have like set room numbers. And then helicopter will be in the music room and like a chorus room. But again, all of that will be like clearly denoted on the tournament schedule. We do not post maps in advance for safety reasons. Fairfax County Public Schools doesn't allow that. So we will have map copies available for teams to pick up on tournament day, but we just don't post them with the tournament schedule in advance. All right. Any other preparation questions? Not questions about the actual tournament day, but about stuff to do before the tournament. I believe the height of the ceiling is already posted as a clarification for helicopter. Let me just confirm that is on our website because I know I got it from the hosts. Helicopter. Let's see. Yeah, maybe they didn't. I don't think it's been updated yet. I think, and we'll post it in meters, but I think it's like 13.3 feet. Yeah. Okay. Other questions. It also has like a flat ceiling. It's not a raftered ceiling. Um, yes, if you competed in the Fairfax Invitational as a C team, it is the same room. So yeah, I think it's 13.3 feet. But I will double check and there's a running clarification where we have it for the other tournament, so we'll make sure that's up there for Fairfax. All right, anything else about stuff before tournament day? See, Deanna, I have a good memory for some things. 13.3 feet. I nailed it. All right, cool. Thank you for double checking that for me. All right. So now let's walk through tournament day. This is where the bulk of the information is, and especially if you've never been to a Science Olympiad tournament before, or even if you've been but never as a coach, there is a lot going on. And so we want to make sure that you have all the correct information to share with your team. So this is the Division B schedule for the Fairfax tournament. Looks pretty similar to the Division C schedule. It's just a different tab of the same Google Sheet. And we're going to walk through each phase of the day. But as you can see, it's a full day. And so hopefully your competitors are excited for the full day experience, and that you as coaches are planning to be there the whole day and have, if needed, recruited support from other adults affiliated with your team. But let's start with the very beginning. So doors will open at 7:30. And coaches should plan to arrive at the beginning of the day, 7:30 to 8 o'clock. That window of time is really like the check-in time before like impound starts. So individual students and parents don't check in with us. It's just the coach checking in with us on behalf of the whole team. And at check-in, you're going to get a packet that has a tournament schedule. It'll have a map. It'll have a roster for you to verify of all the students that are on your team. And it will also have wristbands for you, your other coaches that have portal accounts, and each of your students. So the wristbands are absolutely the most important part of that. We will talk more about that. But in terms of where check-in will be, at the Fairfax Regional. It's in as soon as you walk in the main doors and head down this like big main hallway, it's like in front of the auditorium. Like you see it immediately once you go in the main doors of the building. And that's also like across from where they'll have concessions throughout the day. But so a reminder then about like the expectations policy that I already kind of alluded to, that we expect and require that a school's like approved adult representative is on site for the duration of the team's presence at the tournament. And we assume this is a head coach that's going to fulfill this role unless you tell us otherwise. If you have an assistant coach or something, that's fine. But we also expect these coaches to be reachable via phone and or email during the duration of the tournament. Since the Fairfax Regional is all in the same building, we also are often able to come just find you in person. But if for whatever reason you as the head coach are unable to attend, you need to seek an adult that is authorized by the principal to like represent their school and be there tournament day. Essentially, there must be an adult in charge with the responsibility of their school's team all day at the tournament. And so the head coach or whoever is designated that day as like a coach with a wristband, when they check in, they're going to get the wristbands for the rest of the team. And these wristbands are super important and they need to be secured onto students' wrists as soon as possible. So there are a couple different wrist. You're going to have at least two colors of wristbands in your packet. Coaches are going to have purple wristbands again this year. And then if you have one team, you'll have one color wristband. But if you have more than one team, you'll have a different set of colored wristbands for every team. So, for example, in this one here, Ryan and Chris are both on my teams. I have two teams. I have the Wahoos, C107, and I have the Falcons, C108. But they have different colored wristbands to show that they are indeed on different rosters. This is a really easy visual check for event supervisors so that they know if students are competing correctly among their school, right? That like they're partnered with someone actually on their team, especially for our littler competitors. Sometimes there can be some confusion in that. Um, it's also nice that it actually like has their team number on it in case they forget it or if they've competed in a number of tournaments and kind of jumble them together. But as soon as you get those wristbands and take them to your home base, when students check in with you, we should immediately like secure them on their wrist. They should not be able to slide off. They shouldn't be obviously so tight that they're going to cut off circulation, but like we need to be able to see the label with their name, with their school, and their team number. And then you also have a wristband that you should secure. Again, that purple wristband is going to tell us, yes, I can talk to you as the coach. That you're authorized by the principal to represent the school. So super important. That is like the first order of business for any coach on tournament day is to get those wristbands on their students. And the names matter, right? So like don't just hand them out to anyone on that particular roster. Like make sure they have the correct name. So here's the reason why we care so much about wristbands, other than, of course, helping students and like making sure that they're competing with the right teams and they know their team numbers. There is also the logistical nature of the fact that rosters have a cap of 15 students. And so we control how many wristbands we give out so that we know with certainty that no team is competing with more than 15 students. So if someone loses their wristband, we make it a more challenging process to get it replaced. So if somehow a wristband is damaged, but they have the wristband, they can just bring it to us at headquarters, which I believe should be in the library again. They can bring it to us, we can replace it, no problem. If the wristband is completely lost, then you as the coach have to come with the student to headquarters to find me. Has to be me. So if I'm off somewhere else, like you have to wait for me as the state director to come back, tell me exactly what happened, and then I decide, frankly, whether or not I believe the story, to give you a replacement wristband. So please, please, please make sure that students are not losing them. Don't hand it to them and let them walk off. Like they need to put it on in front of you, like help them do it. Also, if a student for whatever reason has to leave in the middle of the tournament and then plans to come back, please make sure they know to keep their wristband on. We had a very unique scenario of that last year where a student left a regional to go play in a basketball game and took off the wristband and threw it away at said basketball game and then came back to compete in an event later on. And I got to hear the whole story when the coach had to bring him to me. Um, so please, at minimum, just keep the wristband, right? If it's really going to bother them. But they should keep it on all day. So I mentioned that after you check in, you'll be going to your team home base. So teams are going to have a designated space. Some teams will have classrooms as designated spaces. I can tell you that what Fairfax normally does is give classrooms to teams that pre-order pizza because it makes the delivery easier. So that's usually how they decide who gets a classroom versus who is assigned a long table in the cafeteria. So if one of those matters to you, just know that it's often in some way tied to the pizza pre-order. But I don't know if that means that no schools with pizza pre-orders end up at the cafeteria, or that schools that don't have it don't get a classroom. But I know that they try to give a classroom if you have a pizza pre-order, make their delivery go smoother. So whether it's a shared space or a singular classroom space, please tell parents and students to be respectful of other teams' belongings, other devices, other occupied space that they've claimed. It's also helpful if you have either a coach or a knowledgeable adult who's like in that area for the duration of the tournament so that like when we go to find you, they can tell us where you are, or can help us find a student or something like that. Um, so just know that like people are going to be coming in and out of those spaces all day as they're going to different events. But if there is someone in there that's like a more consistent feature, that is helpful. And they can bring something else to do, right? That like I said, there's not many events they can watch. So if a parent wants to be there, but their students all in written test events, maybe they're willing to just bring a book to read and just help them in between sessions. So your home bases will be assigned once the pizza pre-order closes, which I believe is Wednesday next week. So then Fairfax will turn those around. I'll populate them in the portal on Thursday. We'll also have a list available at check-in, because that's one of the more common things that we have students and parents coming to the check-in desk to ask about is where to find the homerooms, the home spaces. So we'll have that available too. In those spaces, please be mindful of the trash or just general usage of the room. And this is actually true in any space, even an event space, that cleanup is part of the expectation. So please make sure that your competitors know that they should be cleaning up after themselves in an event space before they leave, or cleaning up in a home-based space before they leave to go to awards. Events can penalize for teams not cleaning up, and VASO can also penalize teams not cleaning up home-based spaces in time. And of course, we don't want to do that. We don't want it to affect final rankings, but we also want to leave things nice for our hosts, Fairfax High School. Especially for the teams that are in classrooms, please don't use any materials that are in there from the teachers. Don't use the staplers, the tape, the tissues, the pens, etc. Please don't use the teacher desk if there is one in the room. That's usually a space that has the most like personal belongings of teachers. We will provide trash bags, so please don't use the classroom bins. Also, the trash bags we provide are larger anyway, so that should be more helpful. And one suggestion we have, which is what we actually do when we go in to have an event in the room, take a picture of the room when you first arrive so you know exactly how to leave it at the end of the day. All right, so that's check-in. That's like the first half hour. I know that's a lot, but that's probably from my experience as a coach, that was always the craziest part of my day. And then things kind of leveled out from there, at least for me. My competitors, not so much. But the next thing on the calendar or on the schedule is impound. And there's only one impound event for each division, which is Scrambler in Division B and Electric Vehicle in Division C. So that 8 to 8:50 window, there's only those two events that have something to do. The rest of that time, competitors can be getting ready, settling into their space, collecting their belongings for their events, etc. So it is just kind of like a pre-tournament time. But what we mean by impound is that members of the team are going to submit their devices and anything else that they're required to submit at impound, to be held by the supervisors until their scheduled device testing block. The reason why we do this in certain events is because there is information that will be shared by event supervisors after the impound, that it would give a team an unfair advantage to know if they were able to like keep their device in practice all day and go later in the day. So for things like Scrambler and Electric Vehicle, that could be a distance, right? Like, so we don't want teams to be able to practice all day, and have a benefit going in session 6, whereas someone in session 1 didn't have that advantage. So this is why there's also a massive penalty if teams do not impound. Okay. So it doesn't have to be the exact students who are doing that event. It just needs to be students on the team that will just bring the device and anything else that has to be impounded, any tools they plan to use, practice logs, etc. Um, they just have to submit it. They'll be asked to like fill in their school name and team name. So they should bring a writing utensil. Um, But everything that they need to submit an impound is available like and detailed in the rules. So they should be looking at that to make sure that they've got everything covered. And again, if they don't impound, it's a very large penalty. So making sure those devices are going to get to the school in time and get turned in that 8 to 8:50 window. For all of the device testing, so that's for helicopter, tower, and then the vehicle events in B and C, when teams sign up for their session time, um, there is no set order for teams in that same block. So when they return, like when the teams show up for their sessions, the event supervisor will likely ask if any teams want to go first. But just know that the testing of devices takes no more than 15 minutes. It's going to include some questions, like some Q&A with the event supervisor about the device, how it was constructed, how it was designed, how it works, etc. Measurements of the device to make sure that it's like compliant with the construction parameters. And then, of course, the actual time to complete the device task. So students should be there at the beginning of the session, but know that they might not be going and doing something right at the beginning of the session. They'll go, one after the other is what I meant to say. Okay. That also means there is a little flexibility, right? If students are coming from another event, but they should try their best for the device events to show up at the beginning of the block. They also need to bring appropriate safety equipment. So notably for our device testing, this is towers. Also in other written events, there is some safety equipment required. But for the self-schedule events, the only one that requires goggles is tower. And then also for helicopter and tower, they have to actually bring their device since they don't impound it. So like I mentioned before, device testing for these is open to viewing by parents, coaches, other spectators. So we would love for people to come and watch. That's part of the fun of a tournament day, but no other events all day are open for viewing. So no wind power device viewing, no optics laser shoot viewing, no chem lab viewing. Only these 4 events are open for viewing. For tower or for wind power actually too. The goggles that they are required to have for their device testing. You'll notice if you've looked through the rule book that events that require goggles have a category labeled for them at the very top of the rule sheet. Those categories are A, B, or C. And this screenshot is actually from the national rule book, but most of the build events, if they do require goggles, require category B goggles, which means they have to be impact rated goggles. So they have to have a specific marking on them that says Z87 plus. Our event supervisors are trained to look for this. So if they don't have that marking on their goggles, they cannot test and compete without finding a pair of goggles that meet that rating. So if you are in charge of your team's personal protective equipment, please make sure that the goggles that they have are Z87 plus rated. If your team members are supposed to be bringing their own goggles, um, then I would encourage you to have them bring them to practice in the next week and a half so that you can confirm that it has the correct rating on it. So for an event like Tower, right, this is a very necessary component because what they're doing is they're bringing their tower, right, that they've constructed out of like balsa wood or something. And if you haven't tested one yet this season, they're, adding a loading block onto it and then hanging a bucket of sand or hanging a bucket and filling it with sand. And when this thing breaks, you can have shards of balsa wood going everywhere. So it is in some ways our most dangerous event. And so those goggles are very important. To keep our competitors safe. So they need to have that Z87 plus rating. I want to go over a couple other things about our construction policies, and all these policies are available on our website. We also do have an impound FAQ on our resources page that is open and available to competitors if they want to know more specifics of what impound will look like. But one thing I want to highlight is that the devices that are being tested can be constructed only by members of the 15 student team. So this has a couple different implications. So first, let's say that you're a school that has two different teams, Team A and Team B. Each of them has 15 students maximum. Team A can only work on and construct devices that will be tested on by Team A. Team B can only work on and construct devices that will be tested by Team B. Team B members cannot build anything on Team A's devices. Team A members cannot build anything on Team B devices. So even though they go to the same school, and even though they're probably practicing together, they can share ideas, but they talk things out, but they absolutely cannot physically build anything on the other team's devices. This also means that like parents, coaches, mentors cannot construct anything on the devices. If there is a task needed for construction that a student cannot do on their own safely, then either the student has to find a different way to design their device to avoid that task, or another student on the team who can do it safely can do it for them. But there's no allowance whatsoever for parents constructing or doing anything on a device because it's above the level of the students. These are the student devices, the students have to build them. So that's scenario one about devices being constructed only by members of that 15 student team. Here's scenario two. Let's say you have a 15-person roster, but then let's say Chris is sick that day and he can't make it to the competition, but he helped build your scrambler. If you leave Chris on the roster and effectively only compete with 14 students that day, that's totally fine. Someone else could go along with the other builder and help them test the scrambler, and that's okay. However, if you take Chris off of the roster and replace him with an alternate, you now cannot use that device because Chris is no longer on your roster and he helped build it. So please be mindful of that with your use of, swapping kids between teams or alternates if there are people sick, that like you have to have all the builders on your individual team roster on tournament day. Also, your students should know that if they do plan to bring tools, because some events allow them to have tools during the competition window, or if they plan to, tweak things or work on it before impound or before their session, they are not allowed to use power tools during impound and competition. And in fact, if the event supervisor thinks that they're using any tool unsafely, they could be disallowed from using it. So they should know how to use their tools and plan to not have access to power tools. The builders of the device also should be the ones who test it because they are going to have to answer questions about the design, the construction, how it works, etc. So if there are, 4 people on the team who helped build the device, then, 2 of them can submit it and test it, and that's fine. What you can't do is have, 4 people build the device and then none of those 4 are the ones who test it because they're off in other sessions. Okay, so a devices builder has to be present to operate their device. Okay. If in questioning with the event supervisor, we think that maybe the students who are presenting it didn't build it, we may ask to talk to other students. If they can't answer those questions satisfactorily, if we think that the students didn't build it, the team could be penalized all the way up to disqualification. Okay, so please make sure that your team members are abiding by all of the construction policies that's laid out. Again, this is on our policies page. It's also linked in this slide, and I will send the slides out after the call. I mentioned a little bit about parent participation because they're absolutely not allowed to construct anything on competition devices, but I do want to highlight a couple other key points. And there is a full parent participation policy on our website. You are more than welcome to share with the parents on your team. So they're not allowed to construct anything. They're not allowed to do any of the construction components for a student. If it's not safe for a student, they have to find a different way to do it. They also are not allowed to test, assemble, or calibrate a competition device at any time. This applies for even before competition, but obviously, if we see a competition, if we see a parent calibrating or fiddling with a device, this can lead to a disqualification from the event. Okay, so students should be the ones carrying their devices in and out of the tournament space and in and out of the competition. They should be the ones testing and calibrating. Parents are just there for moral support. Parents should not enter the competition area at tournaments. They shouldn't interfere in any way. They are not permitted to offer advice or coaching from the sidelines. Even if they're a mentor for that event, they're not allowed to speak to them basically while they're competing. They can't touch or take pictures of another team's device or take video or anything like that. They are permitted to take pictures or video of their own student's device, but don't be surprised in that instance if the event supervisor asks them what team they're from and clarifies with the student, like, yes, that's my mom, yes, that's my dad, to make sure that it's not someone from another team taking a photo. Parents should also not contact me or anyone else in VASO directly with concerns or questions. These should go through you as the head coach. Probably a lot of the answers you can provide, but if it is a question that you don't have an answer to, then you can ask us on their behalf. And that's true over email as well as like day of at the tournament. Again, those coach wristbands let us know that we can talk to you. So parent questions should be funneled through you. A little bit more about what your students should expect for device testing. Competitors are going to be asked to fill out a checklist for each of their devices, but just the top portion. So they'll have their school and team name, the student names. We ask them to like sign and verify that yes, they was only built by members of their 15-person team. So essentially like compliance with the construction policy. And it also asks them if they used a kit or used a 3D printer, laser cutter, CNC mill, etc. Those things are like allowed, but it gives the event supervisor direction of the types of questions that they may ask. So for example, if you build a scrambler from a kit, it is clear in our clarifications that we expect kits to be substantially modified. So if they say, yes, we used a kit, the event supervisor is going to ask them, tell me how you modified this for your unique design. If they used a 3D printer for a piece or something, then the event supervisor knows to ask them about like, who designed the file, who printed it, where did you get the idea, etc. So it's just to help us ask better questions. The checklists that we use in events are all posted on the VASO event page, and they're literally what we print off for our event supervisors. So I would strongly encourage you to share those with your competitors. They can even evaluate themselves before competition. They'll see exactly how they're going to be, like how it'll be filled out, what measurements are going to be made, etc. So that's a good like week before regional kind of thing to do to make sure that their device meets the parameters. But like I said, this is just the top portion. It will have all the event supervisor questions laid out as well. The part about the substantial modification of the kits is something that comes up in a VASO clarification. So please make sure that your students are also checking and reading those clarifications as they might impact their events. And that's not just for device events, though there are quite a few for device events. There are also clarifications for written tests too. All right, one final thing on devices. Just because a device passed an invitational doesn't mean it will be deemed compliant for regionals. Judging is more strict at regionals, and our judges are highly trained. So just prepare your competitors to like check their own work, right? Use the checklists, make their own measurements, reread the rules. Don't just rely on an assessment that was made by an outside invitational. All right, so after they've done the device testing, students can take it with them back to their home base. They can take it directly to their car. They just need to take it with them, except for if they plan to file an appeal. So teams wanting to file an appeal should leave their device with the event supervisors. Now, appeals can be initiated by event supervisors, or they're more often initiated by coaches on behalf of the participants. But all appeals essentially center around whether there's a question about a ruling on the part of the supervisor. Okay. So parents, mentors, and competitors themselves cannot initiate appeals. It has to come through the coach. And we have an online portal. So that's another reason why they have to have coach accounts. So you'll see a button on your coach portal, like main page that says Tournament Day Appeals. You'll click on that, and it will then have a place for you to fill out information about, what ruling you think was incorrect. Okay. It's also a place where you can go to confirm your contact info. So this is how we get in touch with you about your appeal, and you actually get an email update when we like make progress in your appeal. So that's like convenient as well. But here's what that page says when you go to enter an appeal. We ask that coaches are familiar enough with the rules to be able to like identify specifically what rule in an event was violated by an event supervisor. Now, we're not expecting you to like be experts going into the tournament about every single rule. Rather, you can bring a computer, have access to your rule book, and when a student comes to you and says they want to file an appeal, then you should refer to the rule book with them, go through it, figure out what rule was violated, and then use that as the basis of your appeal to submit. Successful appeals do need to say that we broke a rule or that your team's testing conditions were substantially different from other teams. You can't file an appeal that says you didn't know about this rule shouldn't apply to us, or the test questions were too challenging, or something like that. Okay, it needs to be something that we are violating a rule. We are not being fair in our assessment of the competition. You also must submit appeals within an hour of the event in question. So it does require you to be timely and available to be able to submit them. Excuse me. Okay. So now let's get to the rest of the events, right? All of that just to talk about the build events, but we know that those are some of the most fun ones and the ones that you get to see. But there are a lot of other things going on in tournament day. So we've got 6 sessions of scheduled events. And so please note in the schedule that the times of the events are dictated by your team numbers. If you don't know your team numbers, they are available in the tournament portal. So if I'm team B10, then the first 2 events of the day for me in session 1 are experimental design and fossils. But if I'm team B30, then the first 2 events of the day for me are entomology and potions and poisons. And we don't change when these events are happening, so no exceptions whatsoever. Okay. Most events are also going to utilize the full sessions block of time, so participants should be there at the start of the session to receive their instructions. Now, there are a couple instances where like maybe this isn't possible. So let's say, for example, that someone's waiting on a partner and their partner is just late. They can start the test without them. That's fine. If the partner never even shows, like that's okay. The team member can do the written test without them. They'll of course be at a disadvantage because they're 1 person instead of 2, but people are allowed to do the events solo, if their partner just can't make it for whatever reason. But we all know it's so much more fun to do it with a buddy. So if they show up to a session and one of the team members doesn't have the right safety equipment, that's also a situation where like they could be sent back to get the correct safety equipment. The partner who does have the right safety equipment could start the event without them, and then the partner just joins them when they've got the right stuff. They don't get to make up the time though. So if both partners are late to an event, or like I said, one of them has to come late, like they don't get to make up those minutes. They just lose them. So timeliness is very helpful so that they get the max amount of time that everybody else does for their event. I always feel like a broken record, but it is so true. Please make sure teams are reading their rules. We have a whole video about reading the rules, and if your team members haven't watched it, it's a great video. So make sure they're reading the rules, and in the context here, it's so that they know what materials they're allowed to have. Whether they're allowed to have a binder, and if it's a binder, then everything has to be in the rings. If they're allowed to have a notes sheet, is it one notes sheet per person? or one note sheet per team. It depends on the events. They have to make sure they're reading carefully. Those details are going to be important. Can they bring a field guide? Can they bring a ruler? That kind of stuff. Every event has their own unique parameters. So again, another good exercise to do the week before regionals, go through, read what they're allowed to have for their respective events and make sure that they have all those things. Oh, thanks, Hannah, for dropping the link. That's awesome. Make sure they bring writing utensils to all the events and to impound. You know, still shocks me to this day that someone will show up to take a written anatomy test and don't have a pencil. So make sure they bring in those writing utensils. We will highlight a lot of stuff through this video, through other videos, but they should never just rely on what we say in videos. They should also always be looking at the rule book. So read the website, read the rules, read the clarifications. Definitely read the clarifications. There's a lot of stuff. Read those checklists. Um, just making sure that they've covered all their bases. One of the things that they're allowed to bring to a number of events are calculators. So make sure that they are aware that they are not just allowed to bring their TI-83s to every event. There are many events that don't allow graphing calculators. So in the rule book, it's on page C72 for Division C and page 71 for Division B. This just has like the guide of what each class refers to, and then the class of calculators, what's referenced in the individual event rules. If an event allows a class 2 calculator, for example, that's a scientific calculator. It's not a graphing calculator, so it doesn't have like that large screen, but it has more functions than a 5-function calculator. So let's say they're allowed to bring that. They're absolutely not allowed to compete with something in a higher class. They can't bring their graphing calculator. But if they don't have a scientific calculator, they are allowed to compete with a lower class. They could compete with a 4 or 5-function calculator. They're going to be at a disadvantage, but it is technically allowed. No event allows them to use their phones as calculators. The only event I believe that has a class 4 designation is astronomy, and that's for like a laptop that has downloaded information, not access to the internet or anything like that. So they can't use their phones as calculators. In fact, event supervisors will ask them to put their phones in the front of the room. There are also a number of chemistry events that have additional equipment and needs. So in Division B, this is potions and poisons. And in Division C, this is chem lab and forensics. So these events do have a paper-based test, but they also have a hands-on lab portion. And so they have to bring their required safety equipment. They are not allowed in the room if they don't have their required safety equipment. They can't just say, oh no, I'll just only do the written test. Nope, you're not allowed in the testing room unless you bring your goggles and your aprons. And I have a slide that like details that as well. But just know that like that's firm, like they are required to have that. They're also permitted to bring a kit of equipment for each event. And so they could compete without the kit, but they're going to be at a disadvantage. So the kit is made up of allowed materials, again, from the rule book. It's page 71 in the C book and page 70 in the B book. In this table, for every column, it's for a particular event, and the X indicates that they're allowed to bring it for the event. Now, this doesn't mean that they need every single one of these items. In fact, if they know what they're doing, they probably don't want every single one of these items, especially for an event like forensics. But this is just the parameters of what they're allowed to have. So note that they are different from different events. So like in chemistry lab, you're allowed to bring graduated cylinders, but in forensics, you're not. In both events, you're allowed to bring beakers, and it says you can bring any size from 50 to 500 milliliters. That doesn't mean they should bring one of every size in that range. It just means this is what you're theoretically allowed to have. So they can, choose what works for them. And again, like if they've been practicing, especially I think of forensics because the tasks are always the same, they probably know like what equipment they use and what they use it for, so they can curate their own kits. But they're allowed to compete if they don't bring in a kit. It's just a big disadvantage if they don't have one. They have to have the goggles and aprons though, right? That's the requirement. So we have a VASO personal protective equipment guide that we link on all the relevant event pages on the VASO website. It's also information that's in the rule book. But for the chemistry lab events, this is the one we have the most trouble with when it comes to goggles because a lot of people bring in what are called direct vent goggles, which are the ones on the right in this picture that have like the open holes. Those are not permitted for chemistry events. Okay. For chemistry events, they must be chemical splash goggles that fit close to the face, all the way around their eyes, that have the indirect vents. So in the picture on the left, the vents are black, but your goggles may be like clear and colorless plastic, but they just can't be the open holes. Okay. Now, your school probably, like, especially if you're a middle or a high school, the goggles that are provided by your schools definitely meet this criteria. And I can say that with certainty in Fairfax County, since I teach in Fairfax. Your goggles may also meet the Z87 plus criteria needed for events like Tower. So, you may have one pair of goggles or one type of goggle that meets the needs of all events, but they could be different for the build events versus the chemistry events. But chemistry events have to have all the way around, close to the face, going to have those sweet goggle lines, and have those indirect vents. They also are required to basically cover themselves. So the chemistry events require long sleeves, long pants, closed-toed shoes, hair pulled back. And the pants can't be too tight. They can't be leggings. So that's something that definitely our competitors should know, so that they dress appropriately or at minimum, bring something to change into if they really desperately want an outfit for the day that has short sleeves and or leggings. Um, but they won't be allowed in the room if they don't dress appropriately. They also need to have a lab coat or a lab apron. We're not talking like kitchen aprons. We're talking like, chemical resistant or like those rubberized aprons. And they should cover to at least mid-thigh, right? Like the lap area, cover the torso as well. If they have a lab coat that has long sleeves, then they can wear a t-shirt underneath it. But if they don't have a lab coat and they're using a lab apron, they must have long sleeves from like their shirt or their sweatshirt or something like that. All right, so I know that's a lot of information, and it is just a lot of stuff that you're going to want to take back to your teams, especially if they're new to competing. This video and the slides are publicly available after I post this, so you can share this with parents, you can share it with your competitors. There's also just a lot of information on the resources page. So, yeah, feel free to like distribute the information. You don't have to be the keeper of all of it, right? But we do ask that, like in the coach role, at the beginning of a tournament, you're going to be in charge of check-in. You are the ones that have to check in with us. You're going to be in charge of wristbands and rosters. During the tournament, if you've signed up to be an event supervisor, then that's going to be a separate role. But you also probably just are going to need to be available to your team and families for questions. You're the ones who can file appeals if they do happen. But also it's time that you can watch your team compete in those build events. So that's actually like that should be the slower part, right, of your day, once you've got them all where they need to go. After the tournament, we, expect you to kind of be overseeing the team cleanup, and then we hope that you stay for the award ceremony, which I'll talk about more here in a second. But through all of this, you are the team connection to Vaso. We share info with you directly. We ask that you come with questions to us directly rather than sending parents. And hopefully we've given you everything you need by tournament day to have everyone feeling ready to go. There was a question in the chat for calculator um, math, calculation-based questions, how our team scored. Do you look at the final answer to be exact or close by a few points? That is a more complicated answer than you might think, because it depends on the event, right? Events like metric mastery might be very specific about how close it has to be and how many significant figures it has to be. Other ones, it depends on the question, if it's a multi-part question, if they're required to show work, etc. So all we can say is that, like, for all events, students should read the instructions carefully, make sure that they're doing what is asked by them of the event supervisor, and we train our event supervisors to grade fairly, like across the board, and be consistent. Okay, another question about alternates. So there is no designation for regional tournaments of someone being an alternate. If you need to use one that you've called an alternate, then they just need to have a permission form on file, and then we can swap them out on tournament day for someone who wasn't able to make it on the roster. Um, so that's really all it would be. They just have to be, they would just have a blank for their regional team in the create your teams page until you need to use them. But yeah, if you have to make day of switches, that's part of why I'm there at check-in usually in the morning to make that happen. Okay, awards ceremony. So we intend for awards to be at 6, and we did a pretty good job, I think, last year of being on time. So hopefully we'll be able to stick to that, and we're excited for that. I believe awards will be in the Fairfax auditorium as normal. So here's the deal with awards. So the top 6 teams in each event will be awarded medals. So we usually, in a combined award ceremony like this, will alternate B and C event announcements. We announce them 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Students who are winning these medals are allowed to come up to the stage to receive those medals. And then if for whatever reason the students aren't there, then they can send other members of the team to collect them, or coaches can come collect them. But we announce the top 6 and award medals for those. Then the top 5 schools overall in each division will be awarded trophies. So again, we alternate B and C, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then at the very end, we will also announce the schools that are invited to the state tournament. So that's actually more than the number of trophies that we give at this tournament. So the same proportion of schools is like applied at all of the regionals for who goes on to state, but of course, just there are different numbers of schools at different tournaments. So at this one, it happens to be that 8 B schools will be invited to state and 6 C schools will be invited to state. Schools qualify as a whole, so it's not like an individual team, and you are allowed to change which students, go with you to state. It doesn't have to be the 15 students of your highest placing team if you are a school that has multiple teams. So students also do not qualify individually or by event, but we do have the exception that we added in last year with gold bids, and we will be continuing that this year, and those will also be announced at the award ceremony, and I'll go through those as well. I also do want to highlight that you're only competing against teams at the Fairfax Regional. So it doesn't matter what happened at Centerville or Virginia Tech or Tandem Friends. It's solely like within the Fairfax competition. And if you're curious about the teams that will be competing at Fairfax, you can actually find that information in the coach portal. It's actually public facing on the tournament details tab. So here's our gold bid policy. Some of you may remember this from last year. Others, this may be new to you, but we're excited to have this happen again. And actually, we've inspired it in other states as well. So Maryland is doing it this year, which is pretty cool. So if a school does not qualify overall for the state tournament, but they do have a group of students that takes gold or first place in a regional event, we invite those specific students of that event team to come to the state tournament and compete in that specific event. So here's the example that we talked through last year, because it's from Michigan, who are the original creators of this idea, as far as we know. So in the 2023 Michigan season, Hazlitt High School did not qualify for the state tournament, but at their regional tournament, they took first place in experimental design. The 3 students of experimental design, because remember that's an event that actually has 3, just like Codebusters, those 3 students who earned that regional gold bid were invited to state to compete in experimental design. They were not allowed substitutions. So if Ryan, Chris, and Lauren were the 3 students who won that first place medal, only Ryan, Chris, and Lauren can be the ones who compete in it for that school at state. Again, this is only for gold bids. Okay. If your whole team qualifies, you can change things around however you'd like. But those 3 students then competed at the state tournament and they earned second place as an exhibition team. So they are announced in the award ceremony at the state tournament, but they don't take away a place from a competing team that's vying for a spot at nationals. Okay, so in this instance, there would be 2 teams that get a second place. right? So it's a fun motivational thing for smaller teams, newer teams, or teams that, aren't able to make it to the state tournament, but maybe have a really awesome, duo who do fossils or something like that. Okay. So we're excited to bring this back. We didn't have any gold bids at Tandem Friends, but we'll see what this weekend holds and what Fairfax holds. So hoping we'll have a couple. After awards, usually either a couple hours after or maybe the morning after, depends on, frankly, how tired we are. The full results get posted on Duosmium after the tournament. So this is last year's Division C Fairfax results. And this is where you would see all of the results, not just the medals, but like every placing of every team in every event, the overall scores, etc. If you've never looked at Duosmium, it has so much information. And we are lucky that one of the developers of Duosmium actually like goes to UVA and regularly comes to our tournaments. So we've tried to put a lot of our past Vaso results. So if you ever want to go down a real rabbit hole, you can click on a team and see all of their past results for like the past decade in a tournament. Inspired by you know, me doing that like yesterday. Okay, considering the weather this year, what is the backup plan date if FCPS activities are closed and FCPS schools that Saturday? We will cross that bridge when we come to it. We will have a rescheduled date, but it would kind of just depend on the situation that the weather might create. I'm hoping, um, that the weather we're having mid this week is going to be the last of it, and I think, knock on wood, our regionals this weekend shouldn't be affected. But it would depend. So things we would entertain, right? Like if there could also be delays, right, rather than cancellations. So we're kind of at the whim of what Fairfax County decides. But like last year, for those of you that didn't know, we originally had a tournament scheduled on February 17th at Mary Washington, and it ended up getting canceled. And then we had to reschedule it for March 1st at Lake Braddock. Yeah, we would just it might be at the same location, it might be different. It obviously would be a different day, but we turned that information around pretty quickly, so we would have that for you for sure. Yeah, yeah, knock on wood. I'm trying not to put too much stock in any forecasts until like 3 or 4 days out, just for my own sanity. But yeah, you never know. We will see. All right, last thing here. Fairfax High School will be running concessions throughout the day. They always put on a great spread of concessions. They're in front of the cafeteria by like where the check-in is, and they're there all day. So please encourage participants and families to bring cash for snacks, drinks, etc. There is also a pizza pre-order for teams, so I did send that out yesterday in the reminder email for this coach call. It's a super easy option for lunch for teams. It also supports our Fairfax Science Olympiad hosts. I believe it's $15 per Paisano's extra large pizza. The options are cheese and pepperoni. Orders are due by Wednesday next week. And then you can pay by cash or check made out to Fairfax High School, and they just ask that you turn it in by 10 a.m. on tournament day. They will also like send reminders about that, but that's just like the full scope of what the pizza pre-order holds. So I believe that is it. What other tournament day walkthrough questions do we have? Yeah, like I said, we'll be monitoring weather forecasts, but for something that's more than a week out, not most like meteorologists wouldn't put too much weight into it just yet. So I'll be looking at it more closely after we get through this weekend for sure. But yeah, fingers crossed. Can you quickly let us know the appeals process? Yeah, so appeals, let me go back. Okay, so Here's how this will happen. Your students compete in an event, whether it's a build event or a written test event or whatever. They come back and they say, we think this rule wasn't followed. We think that the event supervisors did something that was against the rules. And maybe if it were a device event, you were there to see it. I don't know. But they come to you, they tell you about it. You're able to then log into the coach portal, click on the tournament day appeals button, and then the page will open up and say, here are the expectations of an appeal. So appeals have to be like that we broke a rule, not just that you don't like the rule, you think the rule doesn't apply, etc. Because it's going to ask you a couple very specific questions. It's going to ask you what rule, like citing the number you think was broken. It's going to ask you like what impact it had on the competition, do you think? And it will ask you for a solution. So then you submit the form, and our appeals team um, will receive a notification. They'll log in to read the appeal, and then a number of things can happen after that. It could be that they have to go talk to the event supervisor. It could be that they have to come talk to the students. Could be both. It might mean that they have to pull up a test to look at it, and if it's something about a question that's not in the scope of the rules. Or there is the possibility that like you misread a rule and we can already just say like, no, I'm sorry, your interpretation was incorrect. So they might talk to you face to face. They might not. Depends on the nature and severity of the appeal. Regardless of whether there's any face-to-face discussion, they will mark it in the system that like if when it's resolved. And then what the resolution is. And the resolution could be, you're right, we did violate this rule, and here's how we're going to fix it. It could be, in that case, like that we ask that your team come back and retest a device potentially, which is why they need to leave it in impound. Or it could be, actually for this appeal, we disagree. This is why we're not going to change anything. Or if it's an appeal initiated by an event supervisor, there could be a notification for you as the coach that there was a penalty given or even a disqualification. If there's a disqualification, I have to get involved with it as well, since that's obviously the most severe. So, that's kind of the lay of the land with appeals. The question in the chat is also about, so I know we have a number of Title I schools that are participating through Fairfax County, and that they are Fairfax County in that instance through the Title I office does provide lunches on the day. I will confirm with Fairfax High School where they're going to be, but I know when they did that for the Division A tournament, that we ran at TJ, they were delivered to our cafeteria and I had to go into the fridge to get them. So I'm gonna guess that's the same thing. And if that's the case, then Fairfax will either have them at their concession stand or will deliver them to you directly. But I'll make sure that they know to look for that because I didn't initially and then had to ask someone to open up the cafeteria so I could get it in the fridge. But again, that was only for the Title I program. So if that's news to you, like don't worry about it. All right, other questions. Okay. Well, for those of you that are joining live, I'll stay on a little bit longer to see if there are any other lingering questions. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you at Fairfax High School on February 22nd.